procedural generation in Starfield. Sit back, let's talk. Now, I covered this in a previous video for Starfield and some other titles, but I want to sit down and talk to you guys in depth about it today. Procedural generation, it fascinates me. It's a technique used for years, lamented by some, considered the holy grail by others. But used in smart fashion, it can provide very realistic locations and incredible terrain and scenery, because many times the algorithms used are based on the studies of nature itself. And you probably played a couple games using it without even knowing, but it's easy to mistake. Is random generation the same as procedural generation? No. Random generation will always be somewhat procedural, especially in programming for world terrain, but procedural generation doesn't always have to be random, and Starfield's going to use them both, and we're going to talk about them both. But we're going to begin with the procedural generation of possibly the stars, the planets, and then how it comes together. And then later in the video, dive into the couple ways Starfield may be using procedural generation as well as randomization of assets to make sure that your journey is different than everybody else's. Welcome to Game Prime number 6, Starfield. No creatures. I think it'd be nuts to think that Starfield is not using some kind of procedural generation or randomization for the creatures as well, at least when it comes to possibly coloration, creation of body types, or otherwise. But we are not going to be covering that here today. Though I have to say, the Squidopotamus is genius if someone just created that creepy bastard on their own. Procedural generation is defined as creation typically through a combination of human-generated assets and algorithms, coupled with computer-generated randomness and processing power. It's important to remember the human-generated part on this one, and the reasoning for that reminder is that it's easy to think that procedural generation is some super formula with inputs and outputs just spitting out creations, and boom, it's done. However, most companies use a combination of pure grunt work as well as programming to create that output, and sometimes choose to work manually on one step of the process that another company would never think about doing, and where they use a system-based processing. Successful procedural generation hinges on the desired output being used to create successful beginning stages of the calculations. Where Starfield is using planet generation as well as random generation together, No Man's Sky is a good example just for a second for comparisons. They took different steps though. The developers of No Man's Sky possibly used the super formula for its creation, or maybe for inspiration. The arguments and sort of pseudo-lawsuit discussion goes back and forth. They at the very least use procedural generation for every element within the game, from animals to plants, planet generation, stars, generation of pretty much everything. Even a single change, though, can wreak havoc, as all of those calculations are a nesting doll, where procedural generation systems are layered so densely and intertwined that one mistake can end up causing you a lot of downtime, something No Man's Sky's developers have actually discussed and wrestled with. Starfield's total planet number, as well as their end goal in game design, doesn't warrant that. The same system that Starfield uses is most likely a more complex version of the one they used to create the single massive world in Daggerfall, but on an even larger scale. First, I want to talk about something. 1,000 planets. Now, that may seem like an arbitrary number, but something I brought up in the other video is that by breaking it down, the number begins to make a great deal of sense and offers a ton of information on how they might have gone about using procedural generation as well as teams to create content. For example, where there's been recent observations of many different solar systems outside of our own, accounting for dwarf planets and those not visible to us, there's actually suggestion that the average number of total planets around stars could be as high as 8 to 10, depending on their age, with young systems potentially holding far more before being jettisoned out, while some systems, of course, are going to have none. And currently, there's around 17 planet types that are expected or assumed by science and astronomy. However, around 5 of those types can be eliminated since they're somewhat duplicated or not useful due to their similarity for a game. Additionally, there are 1 or 2 types that don't appear to serve any purpose from a gameplay perspective, because while a giant gas planet would be a blast, no pun intended, a hypergravitational planet made of boiling acid and radiation activity that could crack your nuts open like a scrambled egg isn't really that fun. Actually, could be fun, and leave it up to Bethesda to put one in there. However, that does leave us with around 10 planet types, and that's important to note, because that leaves us with an average of 10 planets around systems with around 10 planet types to fill it. And this would be a great system to where you could give the asset teams 10 planets of a particular type and say, work on these, and then possibly switch those around to a different team later on. Or maybe you do just have one team working on deserts in particular, taking assets and imagery from not only art, but also scientific and astronomy data. What about the stars, though? Todd's discussed generation a couple times and indicated as far back as 2020 that they were working even farther back in around 2018 and 19 on the engine and discussed procedural generation even back then. I'm going to dive into that in a bit. However, when discussing generation, he was solely discussing planets and surfaces, and that would make us think about removing stars from the equation, but I don't think we will. I assume that Bethesda inputs star data into the planets and a system itself to impact them, and I'm going to explain why that makes sense when we see the readouts in the game. More importantly, we won't see each system have an even distribution of planet types throughout the solar systems. That'd feel terrible. Visiting Carbon System number 134 wouldn't be that fun after visiting 133 similar systems. However, this does leave us with 100 systems, 10 average planets, and 10 planet types, and gives us a nice, excellent way to generate systems in sets if we wanted to, each set detailed down to its planet type, perhaps. If Bethesda starts by separating biome examples for their creations so they can create just desert planets or create just water planets, that's one way of doing it. But I assume they run all the checks and outputs that resemble all the planets, and the fundamental steps from that point on are to separate them and identify which ones they like. Regardless if Bethesda uses a pure formula for all this or something as generic as a randomized list of traits that they then use some computations to put together, it's really not going to matter in the end result, because what we're looking at is a system where they're going to pick out what they like and put it down pretty much regardless. In order to procedurally generate a complete system, it does require a seed as a foundation for generation. We've seen this in a lot of other games. A seed number helps initiate a pseudo-random number generation from then on. All subsequent generations and calculations are based on that seed or outputs already using that seed as a base. And that means using the same seed number will consistently generate an identical solar system. However, Bethesda obviously wouldn't be aiming for that. Now, in basic terms, the seed is the recipe, and all other attributes are how long you cook them if you're throwing some wicked chocolate chips in there or a bit more butter. But the reason why recipes usually say how long something takes is because they want you to know if you're wasting time, and that's something that can happen here too, so I want to discuss just for a moment wasted time in generation. One element that Bethesda would want to control is wasted time creating planets that don't make sense in their universe. Within the generation algorithm that most likely they would have data for minimums and maximums for things like distance from a star within the expected real-world distance samples we have, including, say, Venus and Pluto as references, speed of orbit with a max, possibly no faster than the fastest speed in our system, which is 88 days for Mercury. Or maybe Bethesda wants something unique and throws WASP-12b into the mix. It's almost 2 times the size of Jupiter and is nut-huggingly close to its star, and it takes a little over a day to circle. Imagine the red and brown streak Matthew McConaughey would have left trying to land on that thing. Many other variables are going to be entered into the calculations, though, and certainly more than we actually see on the planet screen. That's hyper important. These help level off outrageous results and keep wasted time to a minimum. Make no mistake, Bethesda has a ton of data on each planet, far beyond what we see. The data can then be used for a huge number of other systems, or in fact, very little other than information, or possibly even for later expansions. From watching the video, we know each planet has a type, gravity, temperature, atmosphere, magnetosphere, fauna, flora, water, as well as 0 to 8 resources, it appears, and an unknown number of traits, as well as, lastly, a level. So a basic setup could be something like this. Stars would be created by the seed itself and not really impacted by anything else. Planets most likely have one hidden thing here, and that is its size, which is probably generated by the star and its seed. Distance would be based on the star type and the seed. The type would be based on the seed and the size of the planet. Temperature would be based on the distance, the seed, and possibly the type as well. The atmosphere could be based on the distance, the size, the temperature, and possibly the type. Gravity would be based on the seed and the type and the size. The magnetosphere would be based on the seed, the distance, atmosphere type, and size. Though you could also see it doing distance as well. The fauna based on type, temperature, atmosphere, and size. The flora based on the type, the temperature, atmosphere, size, and most likely flora is generated first, even though it's read out differently. And fauna has a restriction probably based on it that no plant life usually indicates no animal life, or a unique one to say the least. So it may not be a restriction, it just may be a lower chance or some other adjustments they have there. Water is of course based on all of the prior types as well as the seed. Resources from the planet are based on the type, the distance from the sun, the gravity, and the temperature. Traits seem to be based on either manual entry or random chance versus directly being from the seed, but I could be incorrect. Level seems completely based on the gameplay itself and where they've placed it and what stories they want to tell. Also, Todd indicated one of the challenges of using procedural generation and handcrafted elements is integrating the two in a way that feels seamless and natural between them. Based on his comments, it seems like Bethesda's developed a system for indicating when there's something of interest on a planet. And while this could help guide players to the handcrafted parts within the procedurally generated worlds, I personally think this is an excellent system because it also means that some players will gravitate away from those planets to find locations that are based on the pure randomization of the game world and its living systems. Sample code is right here for a basic Python script that I got. Now, this would spit out examples within criteria that's based upon whatever real science they've used in the code. The basic planet types assumed to exist as well as star types, and gives a general idea of the planet. Bethesda most likely has a very large number of inputs we don't see, and I know I've said that already, but this allows for the developers to generate a large number of planets, either one or many types, within a very easy to create code, especially for generic planet creation and just looking to see how everything reads out. Also, since we don't know exactly when and how Bethesda enters in their own data, they could be running various different systems to generate some stuff, take in some manual entry, and then go back to generation. What's interesting here is the idea that this has been around for years and that Bethesda stated just recently they've become very happy with the creation. This is something that I can't wait to dive into more. This is backed up by a statement that Todd said. He said that while this game is vast in part because of the procedural generation of all these planets, at its core it also represent the most hand-built content a Bethesda game has ever had. And if you go through the main story quest instead of wandering off to explore, you're going to find this game feeling much like the quest lines of Fallout and Elder Scrolls. So what makes sense to me is that they were trying to make a generation system that still allowed for them to have a large amount of manual input without breaking everything. Procedural generation of landscape is actually different. With Starfield, the prior information is most likely used to create general surface data on a planet. For example, there's a large number of software plugins that actually do this for other software, not to the scale that they're doing, which is this many, which makes me think they're using a mixture of old and new processes as well as software. To create these detailed landscapes, a noise layer is applied over the surface of the world, making the world creation appear more natural, based on the planet's generated data, for example. So a planet with a rapid day-night cycle might have a smoother terrain due to erosion. It's like throwing a blanket down and then throwing a bunch of sand on it. The height of the sand is different in areas and it clumps in others. It takes into account the type, the water, and other already generated data from the sea. Now, this is done several times with changes to the noise samples and sometimes type. Each different pass adds more data to the map and more variation. This is then used to make what's called a depth map by examining the pixels in the final result. The darker it is, the lower the elevation it might be, and the brighter it is, the higher it might be. Additional samples can be done to create other maps as well. For example, you might want a humidity map that results in informations like mountains and their peak edges being dry and frozen, down to the wetter sides with snow, and then further on until it merges with other sections. Another map of this data could help in applying textures and landscape assets procedurally. This is done by what's called instancing in a lot of places, where assets are created and rules are made that match up with the relevant map information to apply grass, dirt, gravel, rocks, and other items. This is most likely tuned by Bethesda as well and their own data, like continent chances or population on the planet, especially because they've got some big cities here. All these systems are a lot of work. You can see different examples from other games as well. They can be combined too, and it's up to the developer to decide how deeply they want to go. For example, Spore used many systems as well as seeds. The initial successful building blocks that resulted in good worlds in Spore were whitelisted back into the creation process, removing bad planets and instead slightly altering the good ones to keep that quality high or higher. For that time frame, at least, it was high. This is one way to do it. Another would be for Bethesda to combine their own systems into other commercial softwares. Well, speeding up the process, that actually places it where a lot of people could jump in without requiring a ton of technical knowledge. And I would assume Bethesda's cultivated their algorithm and their procedural generation to not only be fast, but to fit very specific parameters for what they want in the gameplay section, which I'll talk about in the encounters. It's important to note that Bethesda also switched their animation system to Maya many years ago. While deep in initial development for Starfield, Maya is generally known as an animation system, but it also has systems for procedural generation, landscape, texturing, and instancing. It's very possible that by building in those tools, they can merge theirs with Creation Engine 2, as well as other commercial ones, and just create a workflow that combines all those steps. But we haven't got to the fun part, which is landing and running around these suckers. So this is going to bring us to the cell system that Bethesda has used for all their worlds for the last couple years, and understanding how all of this data comes together. Now, as you guys know, while the planets themselves are going to be the same for all players, all of this stuff is done prior to the game shipping. The locations, the side quests, random encounters, and environmental storytelling locations are going to be able to be generated per player and in exploration in real time and placed down in that way. And this to me it's just the awesome part. I love this kind of tech. I love these ideas. I think that done correctly, this can really add to a game's feeling of flexibility when you play it and surprise, because now that you're at this level, just down in the dirt, imagine every planet is that blanket, like I said, 4 compass points though. The poles are north and south, or in some cases, east and west, depending on the axis. Then the planet's adjusted depending on where it is in the solar system, if it has moons, etc., from all the previous calculations. Or, in this case, just something that they want to mess around with. That same planet is then cut into 1,000 perfectly square cells. Now, this is arbitrary and most likely smaller than the number Bethesda uses, but 1,000 is a great number. Each cell will already have all the attributes and information that has generated prior written to it, as well as data from the height maps that builds the cell. That's great because a pole region on a rocky planet will be different than one on a jungle planet. Different weather, environmental hazards, and adjustments, as well as material makeup and resources, will also make sure that the same exact square on one planet that is a rocky planet won't be identical to another rocky planet and its same square. This creates a landscape and also keeps its variety up, cell to cell and planet to planet. Each cell is like the page of a book and can have attributes written to it that fit whatever rules Bethesda wants to apply for random generation, as well as by hand, indicating what random items and procedurally based elements can be placed on that specific spot. Here, it would be caves and mines and rebels, cults, environmental storytelling elements. They can all be placed depending on if that attribute is there, and possibly something indicating the size scale of the attribute. So for example, small mines to large mines. Each of these would then be placed and adjusted once real-time activity from the player occurs there. Basically, it indicates a certain number of cells to always load, something we've seen in all the prior games, and then it goes to the templates, grabs that data, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, most likely there's a large number of checks and attributes to make sure that they don't get a planet with 1,000 mines next to one another. Though a catacomb planet would be pretty awesome, and I actually think Bethesda might do something like that, but that also means Bethesda could take those cells as being worthy of other special entities as well. Attributes most likely will also include interactions with the world itself. Can a creature go there? This is a nav map kind of thing, but it could also indicate stuff where they just want to make sure that the Radiant AI knows, hey, this is a place you can't go for whatever reason, because these are different planets. They're not just different parts of a land like we've seen in the past. For example, maybe you have the ability for enemies or bad guys or other characters to look at particular spots and identify if they're places that they want to go to get resources as well. Also, this could mean that an arboreal world with light gravity is going to feel significantly different than one with heavy or heavier than Earth gravity, something that they've talked about a lot and would make a massive impact on what different articles, items, or assets you place in that cell. But the devs aren't just using the random and procedural placement or creation. They are creating thousands of hand-placed structures and events, allowing for the main cities to have their own distinct structures, reflecting those inhabitants, for instance, on those locations, and then picking from templates and assigning via the cells around them. Caves could be filled with crystalline, carbon-heavy, rocky, or other materials or resources. Richer or poorer explorer bases could be large and well-stocked, or perhaps small and even abandoned. What I like about this, though, is that character generation is actually going to make an effect. For example, if one person chose the parent's background, they could have a parent's home or settlement in one place, and another person who didn't may not have the parents even trackable in the game, or at least their kind of homestead. This also means that will change. It will be different in a sort of blooming effect. It's probably going to track a lot in the save game, too, which I think is something that we're all going to be watching closely. Save games in their titles have not been the best, and I think to highlight what is wrong or right about all this is that a company wants to make sure to use procedural generation in a different way, but to still augment their game, and I'm going to give them every chance to do that. And this could possibly just let the game fit you and be played as a different history by you. The system lets the players build their own resources, their own ideas, unique places no one else has, or harvest alien creatures with blue Jedi sour milk and others, and even just put bases down in unique spots that maybe no one thought anybody else would visit. That might be a rebel camp for somebody. It's not entirely known how all this is going to go about. You look around, you sort of see no human touch this, and you think to yourself, I want to put a base here. That kind of stuff is what we like in other games of this kind, and I'm hoping with Radiant AI, all the different systems they've put in place, we're going to get that here. I was pretty positive there because I wanted to talk about all the highfalutin stuff that they want to do and the chance that it may work out, and the fact that they had a very good trailer. Starfield could get all this wrong. Places may look terrible, locations boring, filter's not good enough. The generation may be so poor that each spot's a cavalcade of fuck-ups, the like of which we haven't seen since Redfall. My experience and excitement are different things. The idea isn't fanboy fellatio if it sucks. And boy, are you going to hear it from me if it does. But I left that until the end here, because systems are fun to discuss without somebody saying, but what if it sucks? If it does, it won't be alone. Anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Check out the Patreon. Check out the Discord. Regardless, check out some cool games. More videos from me coming soon. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.